Welcome back to the deep dive. We are exploring a subject today that, for many people, it remains a source of tension, maybe misunderstanding. Video games. If you approach this topic casually, maybe with someone like a teacher or a parent who's sort of outside the culture, the reaction, well, it's often immediate, defensive even. You hear the language of like noise, distraction, time wasted. The screen, in this sort of common view, it's seen as a wall, right? An obstacle separating the person from real life, real culture, real human connection. The focus usually lands on points, or maybe the simulated violence, or just, how trivial the whole thing seems. But our mission, as we dive deep into the sources today, is really to start dismantling that wall. We're going to try and reframe video games, not as the enemy of culture, but actually as a profound expression of human culture itself. Something deeply rooted in our basic need for story, for challenge, and maybe most importantly, for belonging.
It is good to return to this conversation. And that tension you describe, this apparent conflict between the digital world and, well, the meaningful one, that's exactly where the most important insights often are. It reminds us, doesn't it, that every new technology, it kind of creates a new bridge. And that bridge needs understanding before we can cross it. So the central metaphor we really need to carry with us today, and it's beautifully put in the source material, is this. Sometimes the screen isn't actually a wall. Sometimes it's a window. And when you look through that window, well, you start to see the human spirit at work, often unfiltered. Our exploration today, it's really defined by those intangible connections, the ones these spaces make possible. We have to look beyond just the tech specs, the teraflops, the code, the marketing buzz. We need to recognize that the real lasting power of these digital worlds, it resides in the soul behind the screen. That's where you find genuine human intention, emotion, and that deep, almost unmeasurable need for community. That's where it makes its home.
Okay, let's unpack that because, we have to be honest here. Before we can really embrace this idea of the screen as a window, we need to address the shadow, the very real shadow that hangs over the industry. We have to acknowledge the truth behind some of the criticisms. And the source materials, they're actually incredibly candid about this exploitative reality that, yeah, it does exist within modern game design. It is absolutely true that many games, maybe even most modern games, they're commercially driven. Their main goal often isn't really inspiration or imagination. It's about capturing your attention, your time. They're often built on pretty sophisticated psychological tricks, designed to maximize engagement, keep you clicking, and ultimately boost sales.
Yes, and we can maybe dig into some of those mechanics. Because understanding that challenge, I think, actually strengthens the argument for human resilience, despite it. These games, they often use behavioral science, quite specifically, to create these loops, these engagement loops. Think about variable reward schedules, like randomized loot boxes, for instance. Those are engineered, really, to mimic addictive patterns, keeping players hooked on that unpredictable chance of getting something valuable. And then there's the pervasive use of loss aversion, daily logins or limited time events, maybe resources that decay. They all play on that human fear of missing out, FOMO, right? If you don't log in right now, you lose that chance forever, or something diminishes. The design actively tries to turn leisure into a kind of obligation. And that commercial reality, that's what the sources call the dense fog, the thing that obscures the genuinely human space operating within it.
That's such a critical point because once we accept that the design can be and often is exploitative, built on systems meant to keep us clicking, keep us buying, then we can pivot. We can pivot to the counter argument that the use of these environments, how people actually interact with them, is almost universally human. Despite the commercial layer, people bring their own goals, their own meaning to the table.
Exactly. The player isn't just some drone consuming content. They are an active agent. They're seeking meaning or maybe community or maybe just a specific personal challenge they want to overcome. And this is where perhaps a different cultural context offers insight. If we view this through, say, the lens of East Asian relational thought ideas about continuous exchange, duty within a community, what's sometimes simplified as guangxi or deep relationship, we see that connection, even in a simulated place, is still connection. A relationship built on shared responsibility, on competence shown over time. It carries weight regardless of the medium. That continuous thread, that duty to your group, the need to perform your role well for everyone's benefit, that persists. The game is the container, yes, but the human fulfillment of those relational duties, that's the essence. It makes the bond primary, really, and the technology secondary.
And that framework, that focus on the relationship itself, brings us right to the depth of digital memory, which, as the sources found, is surprisingly profound. We often think of digital stuff as ephemeral, easily deleted, easily forgotten, just bits on a cold hard drive. But the sources show this surprising persistence, this emotional weight attached to digital artifacts. Think about that personal anecdote from the author reflecting on their own friend list in a game. Names of friends. Some still playing, sure, some who just drifted away, but crucially, some who have passed away. Still there, they remain on those lists, literally frozen in digital time, as the source puts it, and preserved not by accident, but by a conscious choice not to delete.
This is, in its own way, a powerful form of cultural preservation. What does it mean, this unwillingness to delete those names? It's clearly not about tidying up logistical clutter, it's emotional preservation. In a digital world where erasing data is instant, keeping those dormant digital markers, well, it becomes a deliberate act of memorialization, a quiet ritual. Those usernames aren't just data points anymore. They represent chapters in someone's personal story, essential parts of their journey through these shared worlds. And the simple act of scrolling past that frozen name, maybe pausing for a second, it's a private moment of remembrance. It really shows how deeply these games can touch the heart, how they can even help with difficult things like grief, honoring a shared past that goes way beyond just entertainment.
Yeah, it elevates that friend list from just a directory into, like you said, a history book, a quiet memorial. And that history, it's often much richer, much more complex than outsiders might realize. When people talk about games, they often focus on the mechanics, hit points, puzzle difficulty, frame rates, whatever. But what about the sheer emotional range you find in these shared digital spaces? The sources really highlight this. The most meaningful moments, they often happen between the action. They go completely beyond the game mechanics themselves. Sure, the joy of a shared victory is great, but it's often fleeting. It's those nights spent just talking about life, job worries, relationship stuff, real world problems maybe while you're just passively grinding for virtual gold or waiting for some big virtual battle. That's what cements the bond.
The game often provides this necessary background hum, a low-stakes simulation that keeps your hands busy, your eyes moving maybe, but the real interaction. It's the vulnerability being shared through the microphone, through the headset. And the structure of cooperation itself creates a kind of safety. You're working together, shoulder to shoulder digitally, with people who rely on you to do your part well. That fosters a really unique form of trust.
Precisely. And you get the laughter echoing through the headphones, the shared frustration when things go wrong, the mutual respect earned when you finally overcome a challenge after failing together. People who only see the points and the violence, they completely miss the deep need for emotional intelligence that gets developed in these spaces. You absolutely have to learn active cooperation, and that means managing different personalities, mediating disputes within your group, relying completely on someone you've likely never met in person to pull off a complex, crucial task. That level of collaborative emotional intelligence, it's actually really demanding.
It requires deep social adaptation, doesn't it? Especially when your group members are scattered all over the globe. A really successful digital team leader, as the sources suggest. They need an almost intrinsic grasp of motivation, conflict resolution, human psychology. It rivals what you'd expect from, say, a mid-level manager in a company, or even a military leader in some ways. They're navigating real-time complexity, building consensus purely through voice and text. And the trust, it's earned entirely through competence and consistency over time, not through physical nearness. And this transition of skills, learning how to communicate effectively under pressure in a game raid, then maybe applying that same conflict resolution skill in a real-world job or relationship that's a vital transferable asset. It really confirms that these digital interactions aren't trivial. They're building blocks for genuine social competence.
Right, and that seamless transition of skills, that competency building, that's exactly why we need to make the jump now. From connection to really talking about games as culture and, yes, as art, the argument the sources make here is pretty bold, pretty fundamental. Video games are not the enemy of culture. They are a new synthesized form of culture.
Well, if you think about it, what is culture? It's simply the accumulated result of shared human activities, beliefs, creations over time. So if we look at digital play, what does it cultivate? It cultivates skills that are absolutely foundational to how societies advance. We see intellectual development across an incredible range. It goes way beyond just quick reflexes. You're developing complex logic, problem-solving skills, often under intense time pressure. Think about managing a complex inventory or allocating resources in a strategy game or predicting moves. You're coordinating intricate roles, sometimes with dozens, even hundreds of people simultaneously in one shared world. That's complex management. And as we were just saying, empathy and quite sophisticated emotional intelligence are constantly being exercised. To succeed, you often need to predict an opponent's thinking, understand your teammates' limits and strengths, learn to manage your own frustration when you fail.
These are core life skills. The lessons learned in that simulated world, lessons in patience, strategy, mutual reliance, they become practical tools. Tools you can use to navigate the complexities of your personal life, your professional life.
And when we talk about them being art, we're talking about a unique kind of synthesis, something that sets this medium apart from, say, film or literature. The sources on here that a really good game is like a moving piece of digital art. Why? Because of this incredible blend of different disciplines all working together within a single title. It's an interactive convergence of almost all the classic art forms, really. But each one is constrained by the need for it all to function interactively. So let's break down some of those artistic components that have to mesh so seamlessly.
Start with music. It's not just composition, it's often adaptive composition. The score isn't static, it's a dynamic soundscape, often built in layers. So maybe the player enters a quiet area, the ambient tracks are serene, but then combat starts, and the music seamlessly layers in percussion, maybe brass, a sense of thematic urgency. That level of interactive performance. Traditional orchestral music just can't replicate that in the same way. The music becomes this sort of emotional architecture, constantly shifting to mirror or guide the player's own emotional state.
Then you've got architecture and world design, creating these spaces, cities, forests, ancient ruins that don't just need to look good and create atmosphere, but they also have to be functionally navigable. The player has to be able to move through them to achieve their goals.
And the architecture in a virtual world, it's a unique discipline because it can, and often does, just ignore physical constraints. Sometimes it's non-Euclidean, rooms can shift layout, physics might be altered, materials can defy gravity. Yet, even with all that freedom, the design still has to communicate a sense of place, some internal logic, and really importantly, pacing. The level designer is acting as an architect, a cartographer, and a subtle narrative guide all at once, shaping the experience through how they present and constrain the space.
Next up is photography, or maybe more accurately, cinematography. You know, the framing of shots, the camera work in cutscenes, even the subtle visual cues that guide your eye towards important information or objectives. These are highly skilled applications of traditional film theory, but applied in a flexible, real-time, interactive environment. And then, of course, storytelling, which in games goes beyond just a linear narrative. It's interactive narrative structure. Ideally, the player's choices should genuinely ripple through the world, affecting dialogue, changing outcomes, maybe leading to different emotional resolutions.
The challenge there, in interactive storytelling, it's immense. A novelist controls one path, right? A game writer might have to track dozens of potential paths, all needing to feel emotionally resonant, constantly branching, and sometimes reconverging. That needs more than just creative writing. It demands complex systems designed to keep the narrative consistent across this huge space of possibilities. And finally, underpinning all of this aesthetic creation is pure mathematics. The system design, the physics engines, the complex algorithms that make the world react intelligently or realistically or strategically to what the player does. Getting that beautiful light rendering or fluid character movement, it's all built on a massive, coordinated technological and artistic effort. And that convergence, that synthesis, is why this medium really deserves study as a new form of participatory art.
And this cultural relevance isn't just theoretical talk. It has serious, high-stakes applications in the professional world. This is where we shift from seeing games just as art to understanding them as potentially essential training tools, proving their functional relevance in really core areas of modern society. The sources give us hard evidence here showing measurable skill transfer, often in fields where precision and maybe ethical grounding are absolutely paramount.
Look specifically at surgeons, for instance, and the use of simulation. It goes far beyond just general hand-eye coordination. Specific research, detailed in the sources, shows that regular training in certain high-dexterity video games, especially ones needing intense visual motor coordination, leads to statistically significant improvements in laparoscopic surgical skills. The games provide repeatable, zero-risk practice in things like depth perception, fine motor control under pressure. It seems to accelerate how quickly surgeons pick up complex techniques, potentially much faster than traditional methods alone. And the benefits can extend into the psychological realm, too. The environment trains focus, attention management, resource allocation under stress, the ability to stay composed during really high stakes, potentially life or death situations. It's almost like cognitive resilience training, just disguised as play.
Yeah, and think about the field of psychology itself. Researchers use these controlled simulated environments precisely because they offer ways to study things that would be ethically impossible or just logistically nightmarish. In the real world, you can observe group dynamics under extreme pressure, watch risk assessment happen in a controlled setting, see how people make decisions when resources are suddenly scarce. Psychologists can test hypotheses about social interaction, cooperation, even things like prejudice, and get insights into human behavior that would be incredibly difficult or unethical to gather otherwise. The simulation lets them isolate variables almost perfectly.
And that ability to isolate variables makes the gaming environment a really powerful laboratory for understanding collective action. It lets researchers move beyond just observing and start actively mapping the mechanisms of how trust and cooperation get built, often based purely on demonstrated performance. And maybe most telling, especially for our complex modern world, is how leaders and ethicists are using these simulated worlds. They're learning complex teamwork, developing ethical frameworks, testing moral boundaries in scenarios that demand really tough strategic and relational choices.
Think about disaster relief simulations, for example. Okay, the stakes are digital, but the cognitive load, the mental effort required to lead a diverse team through a complex crisis, managing communication, prioritizing actions, making those split-second ethical trade-offs between competing urgent needs, that experience is very real. The simulations basically prepare the mind for handling crisis. The sources make a really compelling argument that these games can serve as essential modern mythologies. Places where we can safely test our values, explore the consequences of different actions, and, as the concept suggests, prepare ourselves for the continuous journey ahead, that bamboo path, which always involves navigating uncertainty, adapting, and making ethical choices.
So if we accept that framework that games are both a form of culture and serious professional tools, we can now move to what might be the most profound finding in the source material. It's the part that goes beyond skill, beyond science, beyond anything easily measured. The core argument here is that the deepest impact lies in something that cannot be measured: pure, unquantifiable human connection.
And we really have to juxtapose the common accusation against the reality revealed in these stories. The accusation, as we said, is often addiction, isolation, wasted time. But the reality, revealed through these personal, sometimes really heartbreaking anecdotes, it's love, it's memory, it's profound belonging. The metrics the industry often focuses on: playtime, points scored, rankings, they're entirely superficial when you look at it this way. The true value seems to lie in the unmeasurable depth, the quality of a shared silence, maybe, the vulnerability exchanged over voice chat, the profound sense of mutual reliance that gets fostered in the space between the action. This intangible element, this feeling, that's what seems to permanently transform a simple gaming session into a genuinely cherished memory.
And the specific stories detailed in the sources, they are just devastatingly powerful evidence against that casual dismissal, "Oh, it's just a game." These anecdotes prove absolute real-world commitment stemming directly from digital bonds. They show the relationships are entirely real, independent of the medium they started in. Let's maybe go a bit deeper into that first example, the funeral journey. We're talking about entire guilds. These are social structures formed purely through pixels and voice chat traveling across countries, sometimes across continents. They're incurring significant personal cost, taking time off work, spending money on travel, specifically to attend the funeral of a friend they knew primarily, or maybe only, through the game.
That's not casual friendship, is it? That's recognizing a deep, almost kinship-level commitment. These digital bonds sparked real-world sacrifice. It shows the relationships held genuine emotional weight. They'd shared years together online, shared triumphs, shared failures.
The guild structure itself, if you look at it through a cultural lens, it functions very much like a modern tribe. They rely on shared competence, a kind of moral economy within the group. So when a member of their digital family passes away, they feel compelled to appear physically to honor that person's journey. It completely reframes the concept of a social network. It confirms that physical proximity can be irrelevant when the shared experience runs deep and has been consistent over time.
The second example, it's perhaps even more poignant because it's so intimate. It involves the immediate family unit, sons racing against their deceased father's ghost data in old racing games. For anyone unfamiliar, a lot of racing games automatically save your best lap time as a kind of translucent ghost car that replays the lap on the track. So after their father passed away, his sons could literally boot up the game and race against his recorded best performance, using the game one last time, almost, as a shared activity, a living memorial.
This story is such a beautiful, tangible illustration of memory being preserved, but also rendered active. That ghost data isn't passive, like an old photograph or letter. It's a digital echo of his performance, his presence on that track. It allows for this continuous, active interaction with the memory of the loved one. The sons were, in a very real sense, playing with him one last time, engaging in a familiar competition that somehow transcended life and death. The simple game code became this, the sacred vessel for continuing that connection. It's a profound analogy, isn't it, for how we carry the memory of those we love, a reflection of their energy, their specific path, that we can still trace alongside our own journey, even when they're absent. It turns absence into a form of active presence.
Wow, yeah. And the third example, it reveals community care, but on a massive collective scale. Entire communities dedicating time, effort, and often significant financial resources just to keep old, perhaps obsolete game servers online. Specifically to honor members who have passed away. This isn't trivial. It requires ongoing technical work, paying for server hosting, bandwidth, maybe coordinating volunteers, all to maintain a digital space, primarily because it holds memories. It's essentially a digital cemetery, isn't it? A persistent monument built not of stone, but of code and collective remembrance.
And the implication of these collective actions, what they say about belonging, it's immense. These communities are actively using the digital world as a mechanism for cultural and emotional continuity. They're making a very clear statement. Your contribution to our shared world was real, it mattered, and therefore this world must persist to honor your memory. Belonging gets redefined here. It's not just about being present while you're alive. It's also, crucially, about being remembered after you're gone. And the digital space provides a unique mechanism to sustain that memory, that collective grief, perhaps more easily than physical space can in our scattered modern world. These actions confirm that the digital world can be a functional carrier of cultural and emotional legacy.
So, if we bring all of this together, all this accumulated insight, we land back at the core conclusion of the sources. That the crucial differentiator, the thing that separates trivial distraction from profound experience, it's not the technology, not the console, not the code, not the genre. It is, as you said earlier, the soul behind the screen. The source material is very clear on this. Games can either exploit our time, taking more than they give back, or they can reveal something essential about our humanity. They can elevate, they can heal, they can make people feel truly seen. And the difference seems to lie entirely in the intention of the player and the quality of the connection they're seeking or fostering within that space.
That intentionality matters profoundly. If a player enters that world genuinely seeking connection, the game will provide that mirror. It reflects their own need for belonging back at them. If they approach it seeking only passive distraction, well, it might only provide noise and temporary escape. The game environment itself is essentially inert. It's the player's spirit, their relational drive that gives it meaning and structure. And when we look at the core functions of art across all cultures, across millennia, we tend to see three consistent roles. And these digital experiences, at their best, seem to fulfill all three. Art serves as, first, a mirror, reflecting our struggles, our hopes, our identities. Second, it acts as a meeting place, bringing diverse people together into a shared space for creation or performance or challenge. And third, perhaps most essentially, art functions as a way to communicate that fundamental human message. You're not alone.
That really is the synthesis we were aiming for today. We learned that art doesn't always need a marble museum or a gilded frame. Sometimes, yeah, it exists purely in pixels, or in the intricate composition of dynamic music, or even in the shared silence between players coordinating complex actions across continents. So the next time you encounter that casual dismissal, that quick judgment of this huge, complex medium when someone says, it's just a game, maybe you'll remember the depth of the experiences we've talked about. Remember the profound difference between saying it's just a game and realizing, no, actually, it's a world where I met my friends, where I learned how to lead, where I remembered my father.
We started by asking about the screen. Is it a wall or is it a window? And I think we conclude that it depends entirely on the spirit of the person looking through it. The quality of our connections, whether they happen to be digital or physical, that's what determines the permanence of the memory, the value of the experience. The medium itself is merely the conduit. And this journey of discovery, this continuous exchange of the human spirit through whatever medium, and that itself is a form of mastery. It's the learning, the adaptation that defines the journey on that metaphorical bamboo path.
So as you reflect on this deep dive today, maybe consider the persistence of digital memory in your own life. We talked about ghost data, friendless, frozen in time, acting as memorials. What does that imply about the true, enduring value of presence, whether it's digital or physical? How many ghosts, how many echoes of cherished presence, of shared time might be stored in your own digital library? Maybe in an old game server, an old chat log, a saved file somewhere. What is the true, unquantifiable weight of those persistent connections, the ones that somehow refuse to be erased? It's something truly worth meditating on, perhaps, long after the controller or the keyboard is finally put down.